Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're marking the anniversary of Josip Broz Tito's death, May 4th, 1980.
Yeah, a huge figure, partisan leader, president of Yugoslavia for decades.
Exactly. And incredibly controversial, wasn't he? Seen as this unifier by some, but, well, an authoritarian by others.
Definitely. Our mission today is sort of to unpack that. His life, his legacy, the politics, the social impact.
And we have to touch on those persistent conspiracy theories about his identity, too. Should be interesting.
For sure. I mean, where do you even start? His rise is just improbable.
Right. Born Josip Broz, 1892, in Kumrovec, Croatia. Peasant family.
Father Croatian, mother Slovenian.
Yeah.
Becomes a locksmith, gets involved in the labor movement, the Social Democrats.
And World War I happens. He's in the Austro-Hungarian army, gets captured by the Russians in 1915.
And that's key, isn't it? His time in Russia, exposure to Bolshevism, the revolution, the Civil War, it shaped him profoundly.
No doubt. He comes back to what becomes Yugoslavia around 1920, joins the Communist Party, the KPJ.
And starts working his way up, underground mostly. By 1939, he's the general secretary. Quite a climb.
Then boom, World War II. Axis invades Yugoslavia in 41, and Tito steps up, organizes the partisans.
And they weren't just any resistance. Many argue they were the most effective in occupied Europe.
Yeah, grew to, 800,000 soldiers by 45. And they largely liberated the country themselves. That's pretty unique.
It is, but it wasn't simple. There was that whole conflict with the Chetniks, the royalists, led by Mihailovich.
Very different goals there. Greater Serbia versus Tito's multi-ethnic socialist idea. They even cooperated initially, right?
Briefly.
Yeah.
But it broke down. And the Chetniks faced accusations, serious ones, of collaborating with the Axis powers.
Which ultimately tipped the scales with the Allies.
By late 43, the Allies recognized Tito. Churchill's famous line, support whoever's killing the most Germans.
Right. And the Battle of Sejeska was a big turning point in solidifying that Allied support shift.
Yeah. Then the Soviets helped out a bit in Serbia, liberating Belgrade with the partisans in late 44.
So by the end of the war, the partisans are pretty much in control.
Which leads directly to the new state in 1945, the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia. Tito's prime minister, later president.
Though we should mention non-communists were sidelined, and those early elections, well, let's just say they weren't exactly competitive.
True. But his strategic skill, his ability to somehow hold these diverse groups together, you can't deny that. He establishes this one-party state under the League of Communists. That's the KPJ's new name.
And the core ideology becomes brotherhood and unity.
Yeah, trying to knit together Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Bosniaks, Macedonians, Montenegrins, suppressing those older nationalisms.
And then he introduces something really different. Socialist self-management in the 50s.
It was unique, trying to give workers more say through workers' councils, moving away from Soviet central planning, less state control, supposedly.
How well did that actually work in practice, though? Always debated.
Always. But Yugoslavia becomes this federation. 6 republics, 2 autonomous provinces within Serbia. And there was development.
Definitely. Industrialization, literacy went up, social welfare improved, pretty rapid growth in the 50s and 60s, free healthcare, education.
It was this interesting mix. Central control, but also decentralization, even market elements. But underneath brotherhood and unity, those ethnic tensions, they were still there.
Absolutely. And then there's his foreign policy, the big one. The split with Stalin in 1948.
Huge. Getting kicked out of the Cominform, breaking free from Soviet domination. It was driven by Tito's insistence on Yugoslavia's own path.
Real defiance. And that really set the stage for his next big move, right? Founding the non-aligned movement, NAM, in 61.
He was central to it, alongside leaders like Nehru from India, Nasser from Egypt, Nkrumah, Sukarno.
Creating this block of states basically saying, we're not with the U.S., we're not with the USSR.
Exactly. Maintaining independence during the Cold War. NAM pushed for decolonization, disarmament, economic cooperation. Yugoslavia was socialist, but outside the Soviet bloc.
So they could maintain ties with both East and West, get aid, trade.
Pretty much. It gave Yugoslavia and Tito this outsized role on the world stage, a voice for developing nations, policy of neutrality, peaceful coexistence, all that.
Okay, so let's try and assess the legacy. It's messy.
Very, on the plus side. Unifying Yugoslavia, fighting fascism, defying Stalin, boosting the country's international profile, economic growth, better living standards for a while.
But the flip side is stark. Authoritarian rule, no real political opposition allowed.
Right, the suppression, plays like Goliotok, that prison island for political opponents, human rights abuses.
And later on, economic problems started piling up, that huge debt, plus the whole cult of personality, the lavish lifestyle.
Yeah. And how people see him today in the former republics, it varies wildly. Nostalgia for some, especially older generations, for others, purely negative. It often depends heavily on your ethnic background.
Super contested. Which brings us to those identity conspiracies.
Yes, the idea that Tito wasn't really Josip Broz from Kumrovec.
That he was maybe a Russian agent or someone else entirely. A double.
Right. People point to things like supposed linguistic oddities, maybe a foreign accent detected in analyses, different claimed birth dates, connections to spy agencies, or Freemasons even.
So what's the actual evidence?
Well, the official biography is pretty detailed. There's an NSA linguistic analysis suggesting maybe a non-native Serbo-Croatian speaker, possibly Russian or Polish influence, but it wasn't conclusive proof of a double.
Just suggestive. Anecdotes conflict too.
Exactly. Without hard evidence like DNA, it's really just speculation. Conspiracy theories love secrecy, and Tito's Yugoslavia had plenty of that. Interesting stuff, but not proven.
Okay. So the real undeniable consequence, his death, May 4th, 1980.
And the power vacuum. He'd held it all together for 35 years. That system of power sharing between republics, it just didn't work without him.
And those nationalist feelings, maybe papered over by brotherhood and unity, they came roaring back.
They did, especially in the late 80s, fueled by a worsening economic crisis, political maneuvering.
The declarations of independence in '91 from Slovenia and Croatia, then the wars.
His death removed the linchpin. You could argue his policies, while keeping the peace during his rule, didn't create a deep, lasting Yugoslav identity.
Maybe even that 1974 constitution, devolving more power, maybe that weakened the center too much. Made it harder to handle the breakup when it came.
That's definitely part of the debate. Did decentralization sow the seeds of dissolution?
It's a lot to think about. So Tito. Complex, contradictory achievements, absolutely. Anti-fascist resistance, unifying the country, that unique socialist path defying Moscow.
But also authoritarianism, suppression, and a system that ultimately proved fragile without him.
Those identity theories persist but lack proof. He was undeniably a major 20th century figure, shaped the Balkans profoundly, but his legacy, still fiercely debated today. And maybe the final thought for you to consider is this. What specific elements of Tito's long rule, intended to preserve Yugoslavia, might have paradoxically contributed most to its eventual violent collapse? Something to mull over. Thanks for joining this deep dive.